Hello everyone, this is Patrick from Vicious Computers and welcome to a brand new tutorial and guide on setting up dual boot for your Steam Deck. So first of all, disclaimer, I had tested some stuff yesterday to make sure I was good to go, and today when I actually went to go record everything, none of my audio came through, so I have to do everything in a voiceover, and I'll do my best to kind of fit what we're talking about to the video that I have here. And that probably happened because I just got a capture card so I can capture the screen of the Steam Deck and make the video more presentable rather than relying on a camera, because it's kind of hard to capture that screen on a camera, as we'll see in the pieces where I had to use a camera. Now there's a bunch of good guides out there already on how to set up dual boot for the Steam Deck, and I've followed them myself to get to where I'm at. So why create a new one? The reason is because, much like all things technology-wise, I like to tinker and kind of take things to the next level. I'm adding a few extra pieces here that I think make dual booting the Steam Deck even more viable and better than before. Normally when you set up your dual boot, you either use your SD card to boot your operating system, the second one usually Windows, and that's a terrible idea. If you put an operating system on an SD card, it's going to be bad for performance, and there's thousands of processes running on the operating system that write all the time. It will quickly degrade and destroy your SD card, so never do that. Install it on your internal SSD. But when you install it on your internal SSD, you have to make space for it. Partitioning is what we call that. When you partition your drive, you have to decide upfront how much space you want to give to each operating system. And so you might not really know where to start. You might choose just a 50-50 split or a 70-30 split, you name it. But as you actually start using your Steam Deck and filling up with all your games and programs, you might find that the space you allocated up front didn't really work out for your needs, and it's very hard to change after the fact. You pretty much have to start all over again. And so as Steam Deck and Proton gets better, you might put more games on Steam, and as there's things like anti-cheat and Windows programs, you might put more things on Windows. What we'll be doing today is setting up dual boot, where we share the storage between both operating systems. So that means that we don't have to worry about setting up the right amount of space up front, and we get to use the maximum amount of space for both operating systems. It's going to be very awesome in the end result. So let's take a look at our agenda here. I have kind of the checklist of what we'll go through, including all of the links for the things we need to download. All of those links will of course be in the video description to make them easy to access, so you don't have to just type them out. We're going to download the Steam recovery image, Windows 10 or 11 image, Rufus, the Steam Deck drivers, the BTRFS driver for Windows, and there's a couple of other things we'll have to grab later on the Linux terminal as well. So we'll have all that in the description. What you'll need to do this is at least one 8GB thumb drive. If it's USB-C, you can plug it right into the Steam Deck as is. If it's not, you'll need a hub, but highly recommended that you have a keyboard, a mouse, and at least two thumb drives with 8GB. That way you can use one for Windows and one for Steam OS. And trust me, there's a lot to type and do here. The mouse and the keyboard will be quite a savior. There are a few extra things at the bottom of the agenda that we're not going to cover in today's video because it will be long enough, and those are for another video for another day if you want to see some extra stuff. If you like the format of this video and you want me to cover some of these extras to enhance the experience even further, then let me know in the comments down below and I'll try to find time to do a second follow-up video. So real quick, we'll go through each of those websites that we have the resources we need so you know what they look like to make sure you're in the right place. Steam has the Steam Deck image available here. You can download it directly from them. And of course, it also gives you some instructions about downloading Rufus and how to use Rufus to flash it. For Windows 10 or 11, we're going to use the Windows Media Creation tool, and we'll run that program and it will download the ISO. Make sure when you use that tool, you say create an ISO and not create a bootable thumb drive. We'll download Rufus from its dedicated page, and you can run that as a portable version or an installed version. The Steam OS BTRFS conversion tool, this will be what we use to convert the ext4 file system to BTRFS, a big part of this tutorial. So there's the page for that. Here is all the Steam Deck drivers for Windows, so Steam gives you those directly. Here is the RE-Find. This is going to be our bootloader. That's going to make the dual boot a graphic user interface experience and make it very streamlined. And lastly, the last thing we need to download right now is the BTRFS driver for Windows, and that's what's going to let Windows share that storage space with Linux. So that's how it all comes together in the end. So download everything and put it in one spot, extract it if it needs to be extracted, and let's get started with building our first thumb drive. So we're going to go ahead and open up Rufus, and we're going to choose our thumb drive that we have inserted. And we're going to grab our Steam OS recovery image, and we can either browse to it or just drag and drop it like I'm doing here. Leave all the options at their default, and that'll work just perfectly. Hit start, and it'll start flashing and creating a bootable thumb drive to image the Steam OS all over again as if it's brand new from the factory. Now keep in mind, if you just got a brand new Steam Deck, you can kind of skip this first step if you don't really want to rebuild the Steam OS. But if you've been messing around with it or you just want a clean start, then there's no harm in starting all over again. So this is how you build that first thumb drive. And we'll fast forward to the end because this takes a little bit of time. All right, when it gets to 100% done, it's going to let you know it's finished. You can hit close and eject that thumb drive, and that'll be your Linux recovery USB. For the sake of the tutorial, I'm just going to reuse the same thumb drive to show you how to now put the Windows image onto a separate boot drive. So make sure you have your right device selected. You can leave the partition scheme and target system, all that stuff at default. Do not choose Windows to go. That's if you want to run it live off a thumb drive. We're going to use the standard Windows installation. And something very unique here, and one of the great things about Rufus is once we actually hit the start, we get these options here. It removes those requirements for TPM and secure boot and 4 gigabytes of RAM, some of those Windows 11 restrictions. It gives us the ability to not have to use an online Microsoft account. You can turn off that data collection, use the same account you have on your current computer, and set your region. So this saves you a lot of setup steps at the beginning of the Windows 11 image. Recommend checking all of those. It's going to make your life a lot easier. So once you've got all that selected, hit OK, and then hit Start, and we'll go ahead and flash our Windows imaging drive. By the magic of video editing, that is now done, and we can close it. So one thing I recommend we do is we go back into that thumb drive, and we actually go and drag create a folder, call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it drivers. And we're going to put all those drivers that we downloaded, the BTRFS driver, and also all of the Windows drivers for the Steam Deck. We'll put them in this folder so that later, after we're done imaging Windows onto the Steam Deck, we just have all of those files already available to us. It's just going to make it easier and faster when we get to that step. So here's all of the drivers from the Steam download page as zip files. So extract those first. You can see they're already all extracted up above. Have a couple of extra things on here as well. They're for those future videos I talked about, such as the refresh rate control and the controller drivers. So those are just there for the next video. So we'll copy all of these over. And something I didn't have in my drivers folder that I should have already had downloaded was the Windows BTRFS driver. So I'm just going to go back and download that real quick and copy that to the thumb drive as well. And the reason I kept this part long is just in case you run into the same problem I'm having right here. I downloaded it and it wouldn't extract. I'm like, what's going on? Notice that it's a 0 KB file there. So at least with Firefox, I had to go into my downloads folder, and then there was a prompt there telling me that the file wasn't trusted because it must have detected it could be potentially malicious. So I had to go to my downloads, drop in and say, hey, download this file anyways. So I left this little extra piece in here just in case you run into that same problem downloading this particular file. And there's the informational piece, and that's where we give it the permission to download. And that fixes that problem, so download that zip file, extract it, and copy it over to our thumb drive. With that done, our initial configuration from the computer is done, and it's time to actually go over to the Steam Deck. We'll start by actually imaging the Steam operating system back onto the unit using our Linux recovery drive that we got from Steam. And we'll jump over to our camera footage so you can see how that's done in real time. So I'm using a neat little keyboard dock here. It actually has power delivery, USB ports, HDMI, you name it, it does all that. That'll be my hub. You hold down the volume down button and then you press the power button, and that's how you get the Steam Deck to give you the boot device selection screen. So hold down volume down, press the power button, and just continue to hold volume down until you get to the boot screen. Use the D-pad and find whichever device is the one that's your thumb drive. Hit the A button and it will continue to boot. Once this first thumb drive finishes loading, you get a desktop-like environment. You got icons there. One of them is going to say to re-image the Steam Deck. It should be the second one. Sorry that the camera is not as clear as I wished it had been. It's a Canon M50. It's a decent camera, but I just don't have it set up well for this screen. It's going to give you some prompts to let you know, hey, this is a big deal. Are you sure you want to do it? So you can click on yes to proceed or proceed for yes, and that'll start the process for you. And this takes a little bit of time, not a terribly long time, but of course, to save everyone time in the video, we'll fast forward through it. As that finishes up, you're going to get the re-imaging complete pop-up to let you know that it's done doing what it needs to do and that it's time to reboot. Click on the proceed button and it will reboot the Steam Deck. At this point, you have a brand new out-of-the-box experience. Your Steam Deck is just like the first time you opened it up. You have to go through the initial setup and all of those things all over again. Not a terribly hard process, but that's where we're at right now in this process. I'm going to skip ahead just a minute in the setup process to show you one little thing that I want to point out. After selecting my language, my region, my time zone, and putting in my Wi-Fi password, it starts downloading and installing. And then it gets to this point where it says checking. It'll stay here on checking just for a minute, and then it's going to go back to a phase where it says it's starting the Steam Deck update download. And at this screen, it just stays here forever for me. Like, I've let it sit for a very, very long period of time, and it never proceeds. So I don't know if this has to do with maybe my Wi-Fi at home, because I have a lot of high-end security stuff here. Intrusion prevention systems, DNS blocking, you name it. Or if it's a bug in the imaging. But I found to get it to proceed, what I have to do is press the back button. It goes back to my Wi-Fi select, and then it proceeds right away. So just in case you got stuck on the same step, I wanted to make sure I showed you that. So with that now proceeding, we'll do another time jump here and skip the install process, since that's just a sit and wait situation. When it loads up the OS for the first time, we'll get greeted with our sign on, and then you'll be inside of game mode and your Steam Deck is brand new and ready to go. So the Steam Deck does not have a dedicated video out. It has a USB-C port that can use adapters. Now that we're inside the operating system, I can finally use that new capture card and get us a screen capture to make things easier to see. Inside of the Steam Deck in game mode, the first thing we want to do is convert it over to the desktop mode, because we need to start installing some more stuff. If you press the Steam button, it'll bring up the main menu, and then you go down to power, and you'll have the option to switch to desktop mode. The other thing you can do is press and hold the power button for a few seconds, and that brings up a menu that shows you switch to desktop mode. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So pro tip, using an external device to capture this, or you're just using the dock at all, it picked up the external monitor as an extended monitor, not a clone, and I had to get in there and change those settings. Also, OBS just didn't like it. I had to keep disabling and re-enabling the device just to get the image to show up, but here we are. What we're here to do right now is we're going to convert the ext4 file system, which is your home drive, and also that'd be your SD card, to the BTRFS. Since we couldn't put those files on our thumb drive, the easiest thing to do is real quick just go and install Firefox, and then use the browser to go grab those things. And here's just a quick poke at the file system so you can see what our current mount points are. Just to point out that we don't see the external thumb drive that we have connected, so that's why we didn't put them on our thumb drive earlier in the process like we did for Windows. So with Firefox installed, we'll just go and search for that BTRFS conversion. I'll just show that on screen here in real time. I'm twisting over to the side. I got like one keyboard to my right. I got my main keyboard in front of me. The second mouse in front of me, it was chaotic. And because of my herniated disc, I'm in agony moving around here. So the repo we're looking for is going to be the GitLab repo. That would be that second link. I opened up both of them just to check and make sure. So this is something older, not the one I used. The one we're looking for is this one right here, the SteamOS BTRFS, and it's on GitLab. So if we scroll down to our installation instructions, it gives us the download link, and we just need to download that, extract it, and then execute it. I don't know why here, when I'm clicking on the show my downloads folder, show the path, didn't pop up like it's supposed to, so I just had to manually go to the file system. Firefox by default put it in the downloads folder. So we can go ahead and extract it to a subfolder. Open that up. And we want to open up our console real quick as well, because we do need to set a system password real quick. So the command for that is passwd. And basically set a password. For those familiar with Linux, this is like the super user password. I don't know if it's absolutely required for this to work. However, it was part of the instructions, and I don't think it's a bad idea to set a password. Now we can just right click on the install sh and just tell it to run it with the console. And now put in that password we just set. And this will start the install of the BTRFS conversion. We're going to have to tell it to proceed. And we want to click on convert/home to BTRFS. It's going to run for a bit, and a prompt will come up asking if you want to enable auto update. I'd recommend that you do, and after you select that, it'll run a little bit more, and it's going to let you know that it's time to reboot to finish this process. So I'll jump over to the camera footage just so you can see what that looks like while it's running. So here is our BTRFS conversion doing its thing. Doesn't take terribly long for a fresh image like this, but if you've already had a lot of data put on your Steam Deck, it's going to take a lot longer because it's going to have to convert and move a lot more files. Just want to put it on screen so you can see what it looks like. That way you don't have to worry about if you're doing the right thing or not. It will clearly let you know when it's done, and then we'll boot back into the Steam OS after it's done, and I'll show you what it has done and why that's important and how we proceed to our next steps. Keep in mind that with the default options of this script, not only does it convert the /home directory to BTRFS, but when you choose to format an SD card with the SteamOS, it will also format that SD card as BTRFS. It's a newer and better file system, but the reason it's so important to us is by the end of the tutorial, Windows will be able to use that same file system. That means when we did our partitioning decisions and we gave the majority of our space to the SteamOS, and then when we insert an SD card, all of that space is available not just to SteamOS but also to Windows, and that gives us the maximum versatility in the dual boot scenario where we don't have to worry about how much space we give each. We pretty much get to use all of the space for both of them. So here we are after everything has run. We're back into the Steam desktop mode, and we're going to go to the system options and go to the KDE Partition Manager. Since we set a system password, we do have to put our password in, and this will give us a look at the current system partitions. This gives us our first chance to validate that indeed the conversion worked, because when you go look at the partitions, you'll see that the /home directory is now no longer ext4, but it is now BTRFS. Now I'm struggling. You can see the mouse cursor bouncing all over the place because of the setup I have in the office right now. The Bluetooth mouse was just not doing its thing, so I was fighting it, trying to scroll down. And there's the home directory. With a 1 terabyte internal SSD, there's about 950 gigabytes of space in that home partition there. So that means we get all of that space to use between both Windows and Linux. So the reason we're in the partition manager is we need to make space for Windows now. So we're going to click on the home partition. We're going to right click it to get some options to pop up. You can click on the top bar or on the selection down below. Either one should give you the options we need. And what we're looking for is the resize option. So let's choose resize move. And that's going to make our little graph at the top interactive for us. Again, finding that mouse is just not responsive right now to my inputs. So you can manually type in values, but the easiest thing to do is kind of get the mouse cursor right on the end, and you should see the scroll pop up, and you can just drag it to whatever size you want. Now again, in traditional dual boot tutorials, this is where you have to decide how much space am I giving Linux, aka SteamOS, and how much space am I giving Windows. A very big choice to make, and it could be detrimental down the road if you choose wrong. But here, we just want the minimum amount we need for Windows. Now I have a big enough drive, and I'm going to give it about 100 gigabytes of space. I could give it less than that. But that's just so I have the convenience of installing some things to like program files x86 and things that will be on the Windows partition space. But all my Steam games and everything else, they're going to get installed to the /home directory. And I'll show you how we're going to do that a little bit later on in the tutorial. So after we chose our size, we need to click on apply. And then apply pending operations and hit OK. That will create that change in space and give us a small partition that is currently not formatted. Let's right click on that one and choose new. And we're going to give it a file system. So let's change that to NTFS. That way when we install Windows, Windows will already see that partition as available and be ready to install. Make note of the size of the partition you chose. Mine's like 98.76 gigabytes. Because when we get to the Windows install and you're looking at places to install Windows, it's going to match that. Just in case you choose something that's similar to an existing size, you don't want to choose the wrong one on accident and overwrite the wrong partition. With these steps completed, we're almost, I'd say, 3/4 of the way there. It's time to go install Windows onto that new partition. So let's jump back over to the terrible camera footage and boot off of our Windows drive that we made earlier with Rufus. There's really not too much to see or do in this particular step. We're following the same sequence as before, holding down the volume down key while we press the power button to get to the boot menu, choosing the thumb drive that the Windows installation is on, and then booting to it. You'll get greeted with the Windows installation and graphic interface, and you just kind of follow along. The main reason we're including this segment is just for completion of everything from beginning to end, and there's one really particular important part that you really want to focus on. And that's when it gets to the selection between just like plain regular install and custom install. You definitely want to choose the custom install, the second option, because that lets you manually look at the partitions that are available and choose the partition that you want to install it to. In our case, that's going to be that single small partition that we formatted as NTFS, the 98 gigabyte partition. That's the one we're going to choose. Since the camera isn't going to show that to us because it's just not well enough in exposure and focus, I'll find a quick screen grab of what that looks like and just paste it in here. So as you next through everything, this is the important window you're looking for where it says upgrade, install, or custom. Make sure you choose custom, and that's going to take you to the next screen where it shows a list of drive locations that you can potentially install Windows, and make sure you find that partition that was the one you created earlier to install it. So with that very important configuration piece out of the way, it's just back to hurry up and wait, and just sitting and watching the install run. So we'll just jump ahead in time to the point where it's completed. So here we are, things are finishing up, and it's time to bask in the glory of your accomplishment and open up a nice cold beer, because you've officially now got your Steam Deck set up for dual boot. Like you have Windows installed, you have SteamOS installed, and if you press the volume down button when you boot it on, you can choose which one to boot into. So that's the basics of dual booting, but we have some more stuff to do. So let's move on to our next steps. So it's time for driver installs. as you might have seen, or especially if you've already done this, you've noticed everything was in portrait mode. It was sideways while you were doing the setup and when Windows first loads. So you might want to right click on your desktop and go to Display Properties and find the Orientation option and change it to Landscape. That's going to make things look the right way and much easier to follow. And now that we can see what we're doing, it's time to install drivers. So remember, we moved all of our drivers to the thumb drive earlier, so that makes it super easy for us. We just open up our thumb drive, go to our drivers folder, and we can start installing them. The very first one I'm going to go to is the API. That's the video card drivers, or APU, I'm sorry. So the APU drivers, we'll install that first. Just double click on Setup, and that gets the AMD software installed. Now somewhere in the middle of this, it's going to attempt to install a driver after we click Install to start. So we have to keep an eye on it and wait for that prompt, because we also have to accept the install for that as well. And there we go. It's asking if we want to install that. Let's click yes. Screen might flash a little bit. It's doing video card driver installs. And that's it. With the video card driver installed, now I can use the capture card and actually go straight to the desktop. So let's jump over to our desktop view for the rest of this. All right, for the most part, it's fairly simple from here forward to finish installing our drivers. Almost anyone knows how to just extract a zip file and double click a setup exe. However, if you haven't worked in IT, you might not have ever run into a driver file that's just the raw driver, meaning it has an INF file and not a setup. And we do have a couple of drivers like that. Now Windows 11, and I think also Windows 10, makes it super easy for us just to right click on an INF file and say install. Back in the day, you used to have to go to the device manager, find the device that needed it, and browse to that file. So it's much easier now, thankfully. If you get the option to restart your computer, say no, because we don't need to, and it's just going to make the process take longer. So we're just going through the driver folders that we moved earlier and installing everything. This is the first one that's just an INF. Now, here's the thing. You don't see INF on here. What you want to do is go to the three ellipses at the top of one of your File Explorer windows. Go to Options, and we're going to change two things. Under the View tab, we're going to say do not hide system folders or hidden folders. I always do that for every computer. It's one of the first things I do. And uncheck Hide Extensions for known file types. This will let us easily browse hidden files, which are several in the Steam OS directory that we might want to be able to see. It also lets us see the file extensions, so we can see the INF file now. Right click on it and say install. And I'll go ahead and just speed this up, I think, because the rest is just the same. If it's an INF file only, just right click it and hit install. If it's an exe of some sort, you just double click it to run it and install it. Now here's where you have an advantage over me. In the tutorial, we downloaded the Windows BTRFS driver and moved it over to our flash drive, so it's available. However, I was using the thumb drive that I originally imaged before I made the tutorial. I don't have that file available, so I have to go download it. So I'm just going to get Edge open, Edge, and go search for Google, because I don't trust Bing, and then search for that Windows BTRFS. And I started searching for Steam Deck, but it's not exclusive to Steam Deck. It's actually just a Windows BTRFS driver. And it's going to be that first one there, the GitHub link. And we'll go to the releases. And it's a zip file. We'll just download that, extract it. And it's a simple INF install as well. Now, the first time I did this, before I did the tutorial, it was like an amazing moment because I already had my SD card formatted, I already had games installed, I had a bunch of stuff. Right now we're plain Jane, but once you extract that and you right click on the INF and you say install, you'll see Windows magically pop up with all these new directories and drives because it can now see everything that the Steam OS has. It's actually an amazing way to access some of the files on SteamOS that you can't get to very easily from the SteamOS because it does not, Dolphin, the browser on SteamOS, does not show you these hidden files by default. So here's what I was showing you before. I have C, D, E, and F. Those are the only drives. As soon as I click install, there's our home directory. I don't have the SD card inserted right now for this tutorial, but if we did, you would see the SD card, and all you have to do, the smartest thing to do, is create yourself a Windows directory on your home partition and create yourself a Windows directory on your SD card. And then when you install Battle.net, you install Steam, you install Epic Games, any of those, go create a download folder location for that Windows directory and put all your games on that space. It works great. That way you can use all of your space between both OSs. This is going to be incredibly handy when I reinstall Final Fantasy IX on the Steam OS because it has a Moguri mod. It's like an update, a mod for it. Installing that through Steam OS was not fun. It was a whole lot of extra loops. But now I can just boot over to Windows, install it from the Windows side, but point it to the Steam OS game directory files and make it super easy. And I think I might put a video up on that. If you guys are interested, let me know, because not only will it be good for Final Fantasy IX, but that same process can work for like all your Nexus mods and everything else. But yeah, now we can see everything. And by the way, I'm just showing you the path. It's local, share, Steam, Steam apps, common. That's where all the games would live, but we don't have anything installed yet. So we can see where all of our Steam games are installed from Windows now. Word of caution. While it should be technically possible to set up your Steam directory on Windows to be the exact same directory as it is on Steam OS, and it is possible because I did it, it doesn't work right. I've done it with Windows machines before, and it prevents you from having to download the same games twice and lets you share the files. It worked for about half of my games, but it broke about half of my games, and I think it has to do with the fact that Steam is different on Windows than it is on the Steam OS. And when you share the entire directory, it's not just the game files, it's a whole bunch of other things in there as well. So it caused havoc. So even though that'd be really great to share the same library, I think we have to make one small concession and just keep your Windows files in their own directory, even if it is on the same partition, so you don't run into any trouble. So speaking of that, that's exactly what I'm doing now. I'm going to find the drive letter that is the large partition, the one we gave the Steam OS for its home directory, and I'm just going to create a folder in there for all of my Windows stuff. If I had the SD card plugged in, it would also show up as a drive letter, and I would do the exact same thing. Go into the root of the SD card and create a folder for all of my Windows stuff. So now we're sharing the space. We're sharing the actual storage space between both operating systems and not wasting any space, but we're going to keep our files separate. Now, BTRFS technically does support deduplication. Maybe potentially, even if you have two separate versions of the same thing, it could condense that down to use only the space of one, but I haven't tested that yet. So I don't know if that's actually incorporated, because usually deduplication is very hardware intensive when it comes to software level deduplication. At this point, you're technically done with everything and you're ready to go rock and roll, but you would still have to do the volume down power button every single time you want to boot into the other operating system, because it will only boot to Windows by default now. So we're going to make one more additional install to make it very convenient and easy to have a dual boot system. So this is what we're trying to avoid having to do every time we want to use SteamOS. This is the very last time we have to press the volume down and power button and wait for the boot menu to pop up. But we have to do it this one last time to get back over to SteamOS, because the last thing we're installing is a Linux product, so we need to be in our Linux environment to install it. So we're going to wait for the boot menu to pop up, choose the SteamOS, and once we get into SteamOS, we're going to switch over to desktop mode. So once we're back over to the SteamOS in the desktop mode, we'll once again go to our browser to find what we need. We've already got Firefox installed earlier. Let's go to Google and we're going to search for Refind. So I typed in Steam Deck, REFIND, and it's going to be the second link from this search. It's going to be the GitHub link. Now this one you can technically, I think, download it, but the easier way to do this one is to follow the instructions here. We're going to just clone the repository, navigate into the file structure, do one command to execute the permissions to allow us to execute the install script, and then we're going to execute the script. So we're going to, again, I'm fighting the terrible Bluetooth mouse right now, but let's go ahead and start with that. So you won't be doing a screen recording and making a tutorial and having 2 keyboards and 2 mice going. You can do this a little bit easier. With the browser open and you have the directions right there, you can just copy and paste them right into your console window. So I'm going to go ahead and do that so I don't have to type it. I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste that first command, which is going to be the one to clone the repository. And it's actually a little bit easier for me instead of copying and pasting those smaller commands. If you didn't know, Linux, much like Cisco, I'm very familiar with Cisco equipment from my network engineer career, you can just do tab completion. So I can just type in cd space st and then tab, and it will complete it for me. Next command, I'd like to do an ls just to see what's in there and make sure I'm in the right place. The chmod command, same thing, I can type it up partially and then hit tab to complete it. And that changed our execution permissions. And then the last thing is to type out the command to execute. And the same thing, we can just do a tab completion here. So that's going to kick off our install script. It will ask for our super user password. We set that earlier when we typed in the passwd command, so we got to type that in. Keep in mind it won't actually show on screen that you're typing anything, but it is accepting inputs as long as you have that window in focus. So once we press enter, our eFind will start installing itself. So this basically installs a bootloader. It's an intelligent one. It knows that the SteamOS is there. It knows that Windows is there. It'll be the first thing to boot, and it gives you a choice with a graphic interface to choose Windows or SteamOS. And I'm just fighting right now to try to get the console on screen so you can see everything. But again, that mouse is not cooperating, so I wasn't able to quite get it on screen like I wanted to. This doesn't take very long to install at all, and it'll let you know when it's done. Now keep in mind, everything that we've done today, whether it be the drivers for the file system, the partitions, this bootloader, everything we did is persistent. It'll survive updates to the SteamOS. It'll survive updates from Windows. So that makes it that much greater. Not only are we sharing our storage space and maximizing the value and the potential of the Steam Deck, but this is something you have to do at one time and you never have to fuss with it again. So now that REFind is installed, all that's left is to reboot the system and look at the fruits of our labors. So this very last segment of the video is just going to be a reboot of the Steam Deck, and then we'll choose both the Windows and the Steam option so you can see how it works. So back to the Chromie Cam footage, I'm just going to choose Restart from the Steam Desktop environment. So now, without pressing volume down or anything, when you boot up, this is what you get. A screen with a graphic interface that shows your boot options. Just press down on the D-pad, or you can use the trigger, the right and left triggers, and choose either Windows or Steam. Now that third option, I think mine has something to do with my thumb drive still being plugged in, because after I rebooted later without it, it went away. And so you can see we got into the Steam operating system without any issues. I'm just going to restart so we get back to our boot menu. And this time we'll choose our Windows option. So here's our bootloader. I just press down and then I'll press right to go to Windows, press the A button, and Windows will load right up. So that's it, guys. That's the end of this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, found it both entertaining and educational. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to ask them down in the comments section below. I try to get to everybody and answer those questions. That way I can answer it for not just you, but everybody else. If you enjoyed the video, of course, I do appreciate a like, thumbs up, something like that, just to say thanks for the time. And I did put a lot of my own personal time and money into making this video. I bought the Elgato capture card just so I could get those screen captures. And then I spent the better part of my day, even though I'm in agony with this back surgery coming up, just to get this out to you. So I appreciate the love, and I do look forward to integrating myself more into the Steam Deck community and coming up with some new videos. If you guys are interested, let me know. So once again, this was Patrick from Vicious Computers, and I'll see you next time.